no ladies' restrooms in there. No, none at all. Margaret was the first to break all those barriers down. The problem is, depending on who you know, if you go, I've got friends from Newcastle, I can't mention Margaret's name.
Yeah.
We will physically, not physically, but we will like, me and,
Oh my God.
So I don't know what the end number will be.
yeah.
No pressure. Don't mess up, no.
Mitch, are we okay to go? Yeah.
Right now.
Hello everyone. Hey, morning and afternoon for those who are attending the live stream. So, officially welcome to our first North American Briars Breakfast Club. Especially for those who've made it in the very British weather we've here with us today in Boston, and for those who are attending all around the world. So for those who don't know, there's around 30,000 invitations that have gone out to a YouTube live stream, so please don't swear, be on your best behaviour. There's lots of people all around the world watching this, hopefully. And so that's really what today is about. The world of business now has changed, and we need to be very mindful of our own domestic regions and our local involvement, as well as a global footprint and how we interact with that. And hopefully today we're going to start to talk about that in a way that'll be really useful for everybody attending in person or virtually. And what better place to start than in Boston, really, a city that's long been famous for innovation and investments and has exported countless ideas all around the world. It felt like we should stand on the shoulders of those giants and say, hey, what a great place to start the North American version of the Briars Breakfast Club. So in terms of format, a few little introductions and scene setting from me. So firstly, Briars, I've mentioned it quite a few times already, the Briars Breakfast Club. So who are we? Well, for the past 30 years, we've been helping businesses in every sector, of every size, in every country, take their products and services and enable them to sell them and to operate all around the world. And we do that by providing a whole range of outsourced professional services across accounting, tax, FX, HR, payroll, global mobility, because as your business grows and starts to think about trading in different regions outside of your own domestic environment, it becomes exponentially more complicated. And our job is to sort of be an extension of your leadership team and block and tackle all that regulatory headache, allowing you to scale more quickly, more compliantly, and usually in a far more cost-effective manner than it would be to hire all those staff yourself in all the different regions that you expand into. So that's the business. And who am I? Well, I'm Andrew Fahey. I'm the CEO of Briars. I've been with the business for nearly 2 years now, just 18 months. But I've spent all of my career in outsourced professional services across accounting, legal, financial services, initially in the UK and then internationally, working for an Atlanta headquartered business for a few years as well. So hopefully a little bit of experience in both leading international businesses and selling services for businesses that trade internationally. Hopefully there'll be a little bit of value in my brain that I can add to the illustrious panel and speakers that we'll be speaking to shortly. So finally, what are the Briars Breakfast Club events? So we've done several of these in Europe. This is the very first one in North America. And the idea behind them is just to bring together business leaders, leadership teams, management teams, investors, service providers, into a safe, open environment to talk about all the things to do with global expansion, whether they're problems, opportunities, solutions. And we wanted to do it in a way that's very different than just broadcasting information. And so the way we've set these events up is we're going to have a keynote speaker. So we're going to invite a gentleman called Tony Meenaghan to the stage shortly. And Tony's going to give a energizing and sort of speech that'll sort of really sort of make us think a little bit differently. And if that's all we take away from today, then it was a useful morning as well, and take a coffee and sausage roll on the way. But then after that, we're going to segue into a panel discussion. And we've invited some of the best and brightest brains in their respective areas. And we're going to have a discussion around how businesses now are trading globally, how they need to think about talent identification, how they need to think about the movement of talent between countries, how the business needs to think about how it communicates, and then how the business needs to think about how it leads across multiple geographies as well. And it's not just us, it's interactive, so then that will be open to you guys to ask questions to the panel as well, and the people at home, and they'll probably be coming in via Kirsten, I think, the questions, maybe, or straight to me, who knows. But there could be questions from everywhere to pick our brains and do that. That makes sense?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, well, big round of applause, please, as we welcome to the stage Tony Meenaghan. So Tony will do a much better job at explaining this, but Tony's an adopted Bostonian, a really successful career in engineering, construction, in the biotech industry, overseeing huge projects where he's amassed a wealth of experience in dealing with multinational corporations, global leadership, strict deadlines, all the great things that you need as a business leader. But we're not going to ask him to speak about any of that right now. We will later on in the panel debate, but right now, Tony's got a story that will definitely have touched everybody in this room and probably have impacted or at least sort of emotionally touched people that are joining around the world as well. So Tony, without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Great. So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. And yes, I'm a Brit, but I'm a Bostonian. I'm a very proud Bostonian. I've been here 25 years. I think it's the best city in the US, and I'm proud me and my family have made a life here and a fantastic career. I would never change anything. And Boston will always remain, for me and my family, centre of everything we do. So, just to frame what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about a day, a very painful day for Boston, and perhaps around the world. I'm talking about the day of April the 15th, 2013. They call it the Boston Marathon Day, the bombing day. And the outcome, unfortunately, three people lost their lives, and 263 people were injured that day. But also Boston suffered emotionally, and me personally as well, and I'll explain why that still affects me to this day. So as we know, the Boston Marathon is probably the top marathon in the world, I would say. One of the top ones, you know, London and Beijing, wherever you've got. And so where did my story start? My story started back in 2012, 1 year before. I'd never done a marathon before. I had no idea what a marathon was. But my youngest son inspired me to say, Dad, why don't we do a marathon? And I'm thinking, I don't have a business plan for that. I have no PowerPoint, no white paper. What do I do? Because I always default into my business mode, and they're the three things I go for. But he said, no, Dad, let's give it a go. So in 2012, I remember a Saturday afternoon, I lived in a South Shore place called Situate, and I could see the light from my window, which is about a mile away. He said, let's go for that, Dad. I didn't get to the end of the road, but I persevered. In business, you'd call it resilience, I guess. You know, you've got to break through the barriers, and it's all about outcomes, yeah? Outcomes. All we do is outcomes, right? Oh, not business, sorry. So a year later, I did all the training. I lost a lot of weight. My mindset was in a good place. I lost 40 pounds, I think, in weight in total. And I ended up at a place called Hopkinton, the start line of the Boston Marathon. I was running for the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, and me and my son, we raised about $30,000 for that wonderful institution. And was at Hopkinton, and no cell phones, no car keys, kind of a jacket, running shoes, and I got 26.2 miles to run. Never done a marathon before. We started the race across the start line, and my son was already 100 feet ahead of me. He could run a marathon under 3 hours.
Wow.
It would take me many more than that to finish the marathon. But a bright summer's day, went through all the towns into Boston, up Heartbreak Hill. My outcome then was to make sure when I passed my family and my children and all my friends, with all the posters, come on Tony, they were on Boston Street, about halfway down, if you know Boston Street. I thought, right, when I get to that point, at least I'll look good, I'll look fresh and whatever. Anyway, so 4 hours and 25 minutes later, my son had finished, just over 3 hours I think he'd finished. I didn't know that at the time, by the way. So about 4 hours, 25 minutes, I got to the underpass as you turn up into Boston Street, and I was one of the first to be stopped. So I came under the underpass, and a golf cart came towards me, waving at me, thinking, okay, how do you know me? And a golf cart just stopped, said, oh, you have to stop. And I was literally 0.5 of a mile from finishing the race, right on the corner. And he said, no, you've got to stop. And there was hundreds behind me. And there's a picture on CNN with me bending over this belt, because I didn't know how to stop, because momentum was still going. So we stopped, and we didn't know nothing. You know, my business plan to get to the end was like, well, I've got to get to the end. You can't stop me, yeah? I've got to get there. And so we were stopped, and 20 minutes later, we still didn't know what was going on, but we did understand there was some, you know, a lot of police cars, helicopters, something had gone off. Again, we had no cell phones, no nothing. And then within an hour, there was probably 10,000 people behind me with all silver blankets on and all that kind of stuff. So then the emotion sat in. Where's my wife? Where's my son? As we heard at that point, there'd been bomb blasts. 2 of them, one at the finishing line, and one halfway up Boston Street where my wife would have been, and was actually. So what do? Well, what I do after I calm down a little bit emotionally, I put my business hat on. What would you do in business, Tony? So my default is, what would I do? And stick to plan, find another way of getting there, get around the obstruction, whatever you need to do, I'm going to get to that finish line. So after 2 hours of being stopped, we decided, some of us, we would kind of find our own way back somehow. We went way across the city. I came all the way back into Copley Square. And at that point, I was an emotional wreck, as were many, many hundreds and thousands of people. And I managed to get my cell phone, and I found out my son was fine, and my wife was fine, and all my family. And obviously, at that point, then you realise the magnitude of what had happened. And I got back to the team headquarters at the hotel. I collapsed, as a lot of people did, pure emotion. So that was the day of April the 15th, 2013. But I'm a red person. In business, you're red people, yeah? You're going to succeed, whatever it takes. 17 days later, I got on a plane to Pittsburgh. Why are you going to Pittsburgh, Tony? To finish the marathon. So I did the Pittsburgh Marathon 17 days later, thinking I'd never done one before. Now I'm doing 2. God. Got to Pittsburgh. I wasn't mentally ready for Pittsburgh. I was not in a good shape. I did the Pittsburgh Marathon. I got halfway around the Pittsburgh Marathon, because you can bail out at 12 miles to do the 26. I got to that point and realised, if I don't do this marathon, Tony, you'll regret it forever. And I went up I don't even know Pittsburgh. It's got a lot of mountains and hills, and so I went up the hill. I did the Pittsburgh Marathon, just over 5 hours actually. I was quite proud of that. And so in my mind, my business plan, my whatever it had been, I've done it. No, still not enough. I ran the 2:14 Boston Marathon, under 5 hours, very emotionally. 55,000 people ran that day in honour of the year before. So that's my little story. It's quite a common story, but I take a few themes from that. I've been in business 40 years. I've worked in 6 countries around Europe. I've been in the US 25 years, and that's my little story. But it stays with me forever. And Boston will always be for me the centre of our universe, because it's such a wonderful city, and I'm very proud to be here. So that's my story, and I'm happy at being able to share it with you today.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I think one of the things that's so powerful about that, other than the first time I met Tony, I said, "You've run a lot of marathons for a non-marathon runner." But there's a huge story of resilience there and perseverance, and sort of the power to keep pushing on against all odds. And when we were talking about this and sort of Tony's involvement in this, it sort of dawned on us that actually it's exactly the same as the challenges we all face as business leaders on a day-to-day environment. Things go wrong, problems, curveballs, challenges. Whether you're domestic or international, as soon as you decide to take that business into new geographies, though, those problems multiply, and that sort of resilience and grit and determination is needed more so than ever to persevere. And that sort of helps a seamless segue into the next part of our the Briars Breakfast Club, which is our panel debate. So I'd like to invite the rest of the panel members up. We have Alexandra Brazenberg from Fragment, we have Jodie Roby from Talentworks, and Ross Hunter from Copylab. And I think what would be useful before we start the discussions is just a sort of quick intro of yourself, the business you're representing, and then the sort of lens that you'll be looking through for the discussion today, if that's okay. We'll start with you, Jodie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jodie Roby. I am a true Bostonian, so you will run into us, third generation, grew up here, parents grew up here, grandparents came over here, and I'm here representing a company called Talentworks. I was the first U.S. employee for Talentworks 11 years ago. We're a global talent solutions business, now part of a bigger group called TXM, about 450 employees. I said to Andrew, my official job title is turning S's into Z's, which is a lot of what I do with centralized functions in the UK. But really, my perspective is talking about what is happening with the talent strategy today. We had some meetings a few weeks ago, and it's all changed. It's just moving faster than I've ever seen in 20 years. So excited to be part of the conversation.
Excellent. And Ross?
Good morning. I'm Ross Hunter from Copylab. I am from Scotland, so I am here to take out the U's from our English language. I set Copylab up in Scotland 20 years ago this year, which I'm really proud of. We've got a great team back in the UK, and we set up the US operation 10 years ago. And I moved out to Boston 3 years ago, and I don't regret it for a minute. It's a fantastic city and a great place to do business. My perspective today is about marketing and communications. I'm a words guy, so how we communicate with customers in different parts of the world is really important, and it's not just as simple as the Z's and the U's. So that's my perspective on today.
ChatGPT could do that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks Ross. And Alexandra?
Hi, so I'm a senior associate here at Fragment. So Fragment, it's the largest immigration firm, and it's all we do. We specialize in immigration. We have a presence for immigration services in 170 countries. My particular focus is U.S. inbound immigration, so helping companies to bring in talent into the United States and make sure that they have their continued work authorization, help them get green cards, and the strategic guidance on how do you grow your business and grow your talent.
Thank you very much. And we've all met Tony, but a sort of a reintroduction from a sort of business leadership perspective.
Yeah, so I've been in the pharma industry for about 30 plus years. So I've worked for Merck, Pfizer, Serono, EMD, and recently Moderna in Cambridge. And I'm an engineering real estate guy. So I spent all my time here in Boston doing mainly real estate and engineering.
So quite a varied mix of expertise, and the sort of logic being, we have a panel member who helps us create a strategy to identify where the talent hotspots are, one that helps us legally move that talent around, one who then helps our business communicate across different jurisdictions and borders, and somebody who has led international businesses to talk about the sort of challenges and opportunities. And so I've got some questions to try and take us through that journey, but at any time, if you guys want to ask a question to a panel member as well, think of them, we'll come back to you later on. So to start, I've clearly talked a lot already about the importance of, as a business leader, thinking about your global footprint. A recent study from Grant Thornton suggests that 70% of SME owners know that within the next 2 years they're going to have to think about their international footprint. If your business is private equity backed, that increases to around 85%. Post-COVID, we all figured out how to manage remote workers more, and that then set the chain of events off that actually if your workforce can be this great eclectic global workforce, then that creates an opportunity to actually take that business footprint more globally as well. But I would say that, because as I said at the start, I'm the CEO of a business that provides global expansion services. So I thought what would be great was to ask Jodie to talk about it from a data and a statistics point of view so we can see what's happening around the world from a talent perspective.
Sure, thank you. So I think what is happening today is unprecedented. We've not seen the talent market, the changes politically, what's happening in the US, changes globally, ever before. And so even the stats that I could see, some of the ones that Andrew shared, those are true forward thinking, but right now businesses are a little bit at a loss what to do. Where I'm going to take you back just a few years. So when you think about pre-COVID, there was a huge amount of focus on expansion, UK and Europe to the US, US to Europe and beyond, and all of a sudden we had to stop. We couldn't be going back and forth once a month. We had to suddenly figure out remote working, which we did. What that did is that really opened up the opportunity for businesses to go for the right person with the right skills wherever in the world they lived. And that was a game changer. So organizations who were struggling for that talent because of where their founders had set up or where there might have been commuting challenges suddenly could compete with talent, and there was a lot of good talent in the market. Then we obviously went forward to having some PPP loans here in the US where folks really had a false sense of revenue coming in, and they could go in and hire that person who maybe was asking for 20% more, but they had the money, so why not? Suddenly you look to over the next few years, and I think the FANG companies were the first to say, wow, we've hired a lot of people and the business isn't doing what we need the business to be doing. And actually the people that we brought in some cases weren't senior enough, and we're spending a lot of money for them. So let's just scratch it and start to get down to bare bones. And I'm going to guess most people on this session are in a situation where it's been a time to sort of stop and rebuild. And that's where most of the organizations we work with. So just to give you some context, we work with global businesses, similar, Moderna, Vertex. We work with local businesses both in Europe and the US and across, sort of agnostic across all industries. So I'm speaking generically because it's coming across from all industries. So today, what do? You're suddenly looking and saying, we need to have a performance culture. Our CEOs are looking at our numbers, and we need to be sharper. We need to be actually achieving what we feel we should be achieving now that COVID's in the past. No CEO or leader or private equity firm wants to hear about the economy. It doesn't matter. They don't want to hear about post-COVID. They don't want to hear about the challenges of what's happening with H-1Bs, which we'll, I'm sure, talk about. They just want to make sure that the business is going the way it needs to. So what do? So a couple things that I would recommend is, before you get excited about job descriptions and we're going to put an office in New York, think about the brief. So the brief is, what skill do I need? And why do I think I need that skill? And how does that skill fit into my infrastructure of the organization? And before you're getting to the job description point, and before you're even getting to posting jobs or real estate conversations, do a little bit of intelligence. And that due diligence of intelligence, which might be something called talent mapping, where we could say, hey, we're thinking about, do we set up in Poland? Do we set up in Ottawa? Do we set up in the Bay Area? That was a very frequent activity for businesses pre-COVID, and it's coming back now. I'm thinking we're doing more of that this year than we have in quite a while. because leaders want to have people back in an office. And they are tired of leaning into employee needs. They're really focused on business needs. And at the risk of losing employees who have sort of put their foot down and said, I want to be remote or hybrid, they, for many cases, aren't worried about that. They'll find somebody else because it's still the perception that it's a company's market. So looking at that brief, and then organizations like ours, you actually can go in and say, let's do the due diligence. Let's figure out where are the skills, what are you actually budgeted to pay, and can you even compete with this talent? People often do the first half themselves. You can hop on LinkedIn, you can use AI to say, how many engineers are in this city? Wow, there's 150,000 of the folks that I want. Great, we're going to move there. What they don't know is there's 300,000 openings of what people are also planning for that same talent. So what's different, what's special, and what's going to give you an advantage? And then once you get that part done, how am I going to convert people to come and work for an organization that potentially they have never heard of? There's no brand recognition. There's no, hey, word on the street. So that employer brand is really critical. And I would say the shift in that business, and we do quite a bit around employer branding and talent branding, is it's not what you may have experienced in the past, where it's a 6 to 8 month project with 50,000 focus groups. No one has time, no one has patience, and things are moving too quickly. So I would say an agile talent brand. What do I need to know now to get the right people in the next 18 months? Because you don't even know what your business is going to be like beyond that necessarily. And what type of talent am I going to need to hire? Let's talk to those folks. Let's look at the survey data that we have. And then let's come back with what's called a unique selling proposition of why join here. If it's an organization, believe it or not, Moderna in 2000 was a couple hundred people. We were talking, we were both there at the same time. Nobody knew who Moderna was. They were a pre-commercial business. And they had to grow from a couple hundred to about 5,000 very quickly. So even companies that you think are known, putting in that investment to sort of brand yourself and tell people why join. And the last point I'll add, which is I think a big trend that I'm seeing for the next year or two, is values and making sure that your values are not updated and they're updated to be what is really going to be the experience. A lot of organizations did values work at the beginning of COVID because you had to do something. You had employees, they had free time, no one was going to conferences. But those values were very much leaning into, we take care of you, we're a family, we're doing this. The business is now looking to say, we actually want performance. We actually care. I was at a conference yesterday and someone from Boeing said their values, they just redid them, and it was give a damn. Actually, it was one of the values that the board approved. And so that is, if there's anything you take away, think about is your message, even internally and externally, clear of what the expectation is for the talent.
Yeah, really useful insight. And not that I'm going to ask you to give away everything for free, but when you're doing the talent mapping and you're looking at that, where are the real hotspots for talent right now that either domestic businesses or international businesses should be considering?
So I actually think it depends on the industry. It depends on the role type. So obviously, if you're looking for pharma talent, I think obviously here it's a great place to be in Cambridge, Boston. I think you have the sort of Northeast corridor, so New Jersey, Philadelphia, that area, and then still some good pockets in the West Coast. If you're looking for tech talent, I just think, again, Boston's a great place for that. You'll also find those pockets in areas around Atlanta, around Austin, different pockets of California. But again, California, you're looking at an expectation of salaries that will probably shock most people in the room. And an expectation of flexible working because of the traffic patterns. I do think we are seeing quite a bit of focus on we need to move and outsource this talent to other areas in Europe. So whether that's doing work in Poland for talent, I think Ukraine was a place folks were focusing on, so now that's moved to Germany and to Eastern Europe, as well as pockets of the UK. Ireland, still very, very competitive, and we're seeing a good amount of focus on South America. And what's happening is, and we're going to talk about this, is there's so much change that the model that people were leaning into, even for like outsourcing recruiting, was, oh, we'll just offshore that to the Philippines or to Mexico. But the challenge is you can't even bring those teams together in some cases. So it's really different. And I would say for each company, you have to really look at the argument. Is it worth the cost savings to have someone in a different geography? And my stat was similar. About 69% of CEOs in the next 5 years say they're going to need to have some international focus. Or are you at a point that you can start to use fractional support, like many of us, or outsource? So maybe you have your hiring is done by an RPO like ours or another company where you're not having to set up a whole HR team. You have experts that can do that by region. Maybe it's a sales, maybe it's a fractional leadership. And fractional talent is becoming really, really popular because I may not need Russ every day, full-time salary, but I really need what he can do. So those are the things I'm seeing right now.
And sort of final question, you touched on this a little bit, the importance of flexing a talent strategy. We all like to sort of learn and listen to things of what people do wrong. You know, what are the common pitfalls and mistakes that businesses make on this front?
Sure. I think one of the biggest mistakes is that you get a few executives in a boardroom and they just make a decision. And they say, we're going to call this role a VP of such and such, and we're going to pay them $85,000 to be in Boston. And then that role comes to me and I say, that role is not $85,000. Either take these bullets out of the job description, and then it can be a senior manager. Or if you do need that level, you're going to have to adjust that salary to where the market is. What's happening, and it's a trend now, is there's some transparency in the US that didn't exist before about wages. And what happens is you have someone that says this role, the salary range is between $130,000 and $200,000. So who in the room thinks they're worth $200,000? Probably everyone. No one thinks they're at the 130. Kirsten definitely is. So there's some challenges that come with that. So I think the mistakes are getting too far down the road before you start to take a look. So a lot of companies have under-resourced HR teams right now because they made those cuts. They made those cuts during COVID, and then made those cuts again in the last sort of 18 months. That they haven't had as much activity with hiring and open rec, so they've sort of gotten rid of their recruiting team. So now you have recruiters that are overloaded with 30 or 40 roles, and they can't really do the sourcing. On the flip side, you can put up an ad on LinkedIn or Indeed, and you might get 500 responses in an hour or two, and 498 of those aren't relevant. So it's the time commitment in the wrong places. So my advice to companies is, although it may seem like some cost up front, if you have really critical positions, it is worth taking a minute and figuring out, okay, what do I need? Why do I think this? What's the brief? What are the skills? Am I flexible in that? Can I look at a few different markets and compare? And then what other knowledge do I need to know locally? You know, what's my reputation in the market? If I don't have a reputation, is there a competitor that has maybe not a great reputation and will have some success? So it's balancing all those pieces at once, and a fair amount of that you could do internally, and then the fair amount, it just makes sense to outsource bits and pieces so that your internal team isn't frustrated and they're doing the work you really want them to do to grow the business.
Okay. So we're in a position where Jodie's helped us map the talent market, and we've flexed our employer brand to appeal in theirs, and we've checked out the competition to make sure that we're not going to be saturated, and we've updated our values and behaviours to make sure that actually we're a modern, engaging company, and we've found the talent. How do we then go about bringing that talent across? And it's a great time to sort of segue to Alexandra here. What are the common challenges that are being faced at the moment, particularly in your area in immigration, and how that moves?
Sure. So there's lots of challenges, at least in U.S. immigration right now. Of course, immigration itself, it's a very complex area of law. There's lots of requirements and regulations, and it's also so fluid because it is constantly changing. It's getting tougher. So just following up on, can you do? It's not always clear. So you can try and create an immigration plan and that could go out the window because your plan might not be impactful anymore. So part of addressing that challenge is really staying up to date on what are the changes, how does that impact my business, how does that impact who we can hire, and how can we get them here. I think another really big challenge is just the timing. Say you've identified a candidate that has these really great credentials that you want to bring over or hire locally. How do you get them here on time to make sure that they can work on the project that you really need them to do? And how do you keep them here? Part of that is doing your homework and your due diligence in advance. So understanding what types of roles can you bring over. Some roles are, have just more options. If you have somebody that has higher credentials, like PhDs and things like that, or more senior in your career, there'll be more options available for people. Hiring students right out of school is becoming more difficult. That's usually a really, really great source of talent. And trying to pivot on, does it still make sense to hire people out of school? What's going to change there? If you do hire somebody that's just graduated from university here and they're not a U.S. worker, how do you keep them here? And following the laws with that, I think those are the biggest challenges that we're seeing right now.
And lessons learned perspective, what are the common mistakes that you're seeing businesses make at the moment? We all want to learn from that, so anything you can share would be really helpful.
The biggest mistake we see is paying attention to compliance and minimizing your risk. With immigration, there's a lot of paperwork that's not fun, but you have to do it. So, when you hire somebody, you have to do an I-9 and make sure that they are work authorized. Well, you have to not only do that when you hire them, but also if they need an extension. If you have an H-1B worker, there's paperwork that you have to keep that has to be publicly available. And all of that paperwork, you have to maintain it, especially now more than ever because there could be an audit, there could be an investigation. We're expecting to see more of those. The Department of State has issued something called Project Firewall, where they're going to be increasing these audits. And so you don't want to be in a position where you have an audit and then you're kind of scrambling to get everything together. You want to have a process and a protocol in place where you know that you have all of your ducks in a row, that you are following the laws that you need to do, and that you are planning in advance before any kind of compliance issues comes to your door.
And you touched on it a little bit then, and Jody before talked about these C-suite executives locking themselves in a room and making. I feel I need to speak on behalf of the world's C-suite executives now to try and do that. But there's a real challenge in balancing pace and compliance here, isn't there? We need to move quickly. There's an opportunity. There's a competitive threat. We need to move that time. How as leaders, can we balance pace and compliance?
There are certainly strategies that companies can partake to make sure that they can hire people sooner, because immigration sometimes can take a really long time. Part of that is making in financial investments. There are options for premium processing where you can get cases accomplished faster if you pay more government fees. There's also strategies for global companies, like looking to transfer from other offices. If you have somebody in an office abroad and you transfer them as an intercompany transferee, that can be a really fast way to bring somebody on board. So kind of looking at, what is your internal company structure and how can that help you to retain talent? There's also other visa categories. If you are an investor in the United States and you're from a certain treaty country, if you are building a business here, hiring US workers, and half of your organization is owned by a treaty country, that can be another great way that when you have your company's registration, you can bring people in from that country. So there are kind of things you can do to register your business before you need to actually hire people.
Okay. And I'm sure.
Just a point on that too, I think the contract workers are a bridge, and that's something we're seeing more and more as far as another trend where you have a supply of good quality, often senior people that are in transition now because of some of the adjustments in the last 18 months. And there's a willingness now that people can have their own benefits. There's changes where that talent didn't exist 10 years ago. So you might be waiting for that amazing person that's going to take 4 or 5 months. That project needs to kicked off. So there's options for these, people who want to stay contractors. They want to have some work-life balance. They'll work really, really hard and take the summers off. So it's just being flexible so that you're not sacrificing who you need. And you don't have to fire them when this person comes over. They know that their contract's ending.
And that brings its whole host of opportunity and compliance challenges as well, and making sure that they're assessed as contractors properly and the taxation's correctly as well. So I think whichever way you go, the compliance standards are really important to make sure that as business leaders we don't try and run too fast and get into hot water as a result of that. And so if we follow this logical trail, we've mapped the talent, we've found the worker, and Alexandra has now really helped us sort of, in a really quick fashion, move this worker across, and we're ready to go and start trading. And we suddenly realise that all the S's and Z's are back to front, as we said. And it's a sort of great opportunity to now ask Ross to comment on how do we as business leaders and businesses and sales and marketing professionals, how do we need to think about communication as we move into different geographies?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is where the fun starts, right? The background is that we work for big multinational investment companies, so BlackRock, Vanguard, these kind of companies operating in dozens of places around the world. So the way they think about it and the way we work with them is what is non-negotiable, what's consistent, what can't change, and what has to be flexed for different geographies. And the basic answer is, and I should caveat this to say that it's not the same for every company and every situation, but generally the brand, the logo, the colors, the photography has to stay the same. There has to be a consistency of what the customer sees wherever in the world they're doing business. But if I'm thinking specifically about UK and US trade, whether it's going one way or another, there's a saying, Britain and America are two countries divided by a common language. I'm sure that was ascribed to Lincoln or Mark Twain or Oscar Wilde. It's probably none of them actually. But the point is, when you start to communicate with your customers, don't assume that just because we speak the same language, sort of, that we want to communicate in the same way, because it really isn't. And I've found that with coming from the UK to America in the last 3 years. We've traded here for 10 years, but I only moved here 3 years ago, and it was really eye-opening just to spend more time seeing American TV ads for the Ram truck that's going around just now, which is like eagles and flags and Go America, which I love, by the way. I think it's really great. But that just won't translate into the UK, right? We have a very different mindset around how we portray, how confident we are, how assertive we are, and how direct we are in our language. So I spend a bit of, this applies more obviously to maybe brands like Ram Trucks or McDonald's or the local car dealer that you see advertising on TV. But there's more subtleties perhaps for B2B companies, especially banks and investment companies. But it's still there. There's a nuance there that you have to get right. So what I did last night was I spent a bit of time just going on some client websites and some other companies' websites. And I think this is a practical tip for those of you that are thinking about going to other countries, is to go to the leader in your market. So I went to like PwC and Deloitte last night, went to their homepage for North America, and then toggled to their UK page and just toggled back and forward just to see, well, how do they talk about their companies in a different way? And it is really eye-opening just to see the confidence and the assertiveness that American companies talk about. And what they're trying to do is to use social proof to say, this is what we're going to deliver for you. It's going to be amazing, and we're confident we are going to execute on that. Whereas in the UK, we're far more reserved, and it's like, here's the things that we can, here's the services and the benefits that we can deliver to you. But UK, you're seen as a little brash and vulgar if you take it too far and say, and we're going to smash it out the park for you. That's just not the way we operate. Now, like I said, there's a caveat to that. That's a generalism, and it doesn't always apply. And in fact, that's a real typical thing of being British, that we will caveat pretty much everything.
They're sitting on the fence.
Oh, yeah. That could all be right, and it could all be completely wrong.
Yeah.
And this is a bit of a personal experience of mind as well. When we create a business, and we've done really well in our domestic environment, we're really proud of that, and so we think that actually almost franchising every element of that and picking it up and almost sort of rinse and repeat is going to be the right way to go. What are the real pitfalls of getting that wrong, Ross? If, you know, just assuming that that's because I work for an organisation that, and the reason they had this mantra, it was a good idea, but it was a one organisational structure, one communication strategy across the globe, and that's absolutely fine until you have a head of marketing in APAC saying, I get you want to spend $100,000 on that keyword, but that doesn't mean what you think it means here in Australia. No, we have one language. Yeah, no, that we have to. No, we have. Okay, well, I'll waste $100,000 if you want, but. And so that's just a sort of simple throwaway example. So what happens when we don't listen to this?
Well, I mean, it's a waste of money and marketing dollars, that's for sure, or pounds or euros. So a good example, I actually, something I prepared earlier, as those of you in the UK will know. It is about nuance, actually. It doesn't have to be, you know, radically different. You should have your brand pillars and your key messaging that it underpins the business no matter where you are. But you can flex it, and you need to use your local talent or your customers to do the research and make sure that your SEO is targeted for local audiences, and even as much as just your taglines and your languages. So I'll do the PwC version for you, which was their homepage last night. I looked at it and it says, in the UK, the very top line in their homepage says, for PwC, the next era, our annual report, fiscal year 2025, showing resilience in a year of transformation and change. Pretty British, pretty factual there. Then you come to the American homepage and it says, we deliver expertise no one else has, so you can explore opportunities no one else can see.
That's right.
So none of those, right? Neither of those things are wrong, and they kind of reflect the business, but they're a very different tone that you project, and you need to take that to all your markets to just resonate with the customers that are clicking on your site.
And sort of, again, a useful sort of tip here to maybe take away, and touching on a point Jodie made, these things require investment, and so there's usually a board or private equity there that you need to convince that this investment is worthwhile as well. What advice would you give to sort of the business leaders in the room around, well, this is important, create the business case properly and make sure it's properly invested in as well?
Yeah, I don't think this is a US, UK thing. I think this is a global thing now. It's all about KPIs and showing the metrics to the board. The question is, how do you do that with marketing when so much of it is subjective, especially when you're measuring brand. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of marketing departments are really struggling to sell the value of brand to their boards, and we'll just revert to, let's just do performance marketing. We can measure LinkedIn, we can measure clicks, we can measure email response rates. So it's easier to do that. Yeah. It's not the answer, but it's an easier sell to the board. I think there's a way to be quite mechanical about it as well, and this is the way I try and think about it. And there's a sort of series of questions you can ask yourself to sort of retrofit your sales target back to the amount of marketing dollars you spend on each aspect of your marketing plan. So let's say you take your sales target, $1 million for the year, for the sake of argument, and you figure out, well, how many proposals do I need to send out to get to my sales target, to get to the number of clients that will hit my sales target, and then how many meetings do I need to hit in order to get those proposals, and then how many marketing items, how many times does a company or an individual need to see my marketing stuff in order to be persuaded to take a meeting with me. And then you can figure out, well, if I have 10,000 marketing hits, it'll ultimately go through my funnel and land in $1 million. Now that's quite simplistic, and there's lots of variables to that, which is where the creative process comes in to maximize, well, where am I going to get the most bang for my buck to get people in a room with me. But that's a nice mechanical way that a board or a private equity board can see the value that marketing brings and think of it as an investment rather than just a cost.
And it's not just for growth and new sales, it's for people and retention as well. How you communicate to your people in multiple locations will change significantly as you're leading in different environments. You know, we've talked a little bit how similar and we are different. When I merged my business with a US firm, the corporate lawyer who sort of oversaw the transaction gave me some words of advice on this. He said, well, we have a US office, we have a French office and a UK office, and the best way to explain the cultural differences are the attitudes to holidays or vacations. So the British will want their 2 weeks off no matter what, and the Americans will jump up and down and say that's outrageous, but spend every long weekend in their summer house, and the French won't have an opinion because they've took the entire summer off and you can't get hold of them. And it was a sort of really interesting way of sort of just thinking about how everybody's the same, but culturally that's a very, very different thing, which sort of segues nicely onto sort of leadership challenges then as well. And I'll ask Tony to sort of comment on this now, less as a marathon runner, but more as somebody that sort of worked in senior positions in a leadership perspective. And what do you think the biggest mindset change is when you go from managing domestic resource that you can see and sort of be in the room with to actually managing a more fragmented, potentially global team?
Tolerance, flexibility, understanding, and that's only part of it. When you're managing a multi-nationality team from across the world, they all have different expectations of you, and they all want different things from you, and you have to find a balance as a leader to get what you need. My default, I talk about default, business default, is that I'm going to go over there, wherever your outcome is. How do I get over there and get through all of this, but bring everybody with you? So if you can lead, I often say lead from behind sometimes, because it's all about company culture, empowering your people. Don't care where they're from. Do they have the same vision to get over there together and deliver the results on the way through? Yes, it's all metrics based. I agree. You metrics, everything's measured these days, but there has to be a common goal. So I worked with many cancer research scientists over the years. Incredible people. I lost my sister from breast cancer 32 years ago, and I've been building cancer research centres ever since. But I was never quick enough for my sister. You talk to a scientist, talk about end goals, right? Find the cure for cancer, right? They start in a lab with one molecule, one lead, and then they do the experiment, and it splits into two, left and right, and then they go this way and they break into four more. After about a couple of years, they have 10,000 leads to get to where they're going to. Yeah. So how do you manage all of that and still get to the end game? Well, it's discipline, resilience, discipline. Be flexible, but always remember as a leader where you're trying to get to and what you're trying to deliver, because if you don't deliver, there's always somebody above you who's going to kind of tell you how it should be. But it is difficult managing a multinational team. But you have to have the ability to get the best out of people and still keep them in the same direction. And it's not easy, especially today. You get people who want to work from home, and people want to come in the office, and how do you measure that performance? But ultimately, I do believe in a common goal. Are your employees got a common goal? Do they all want to get over there, wherever you're heading to? And that is a work of art. It's not easy. Many things to consider. But ultimately, if you have the right employees focused in the right direction, give them boundaries, of course you can, yeah? A bit of flexibility. You can achieve a lot. My 25 years in the US, it's been eye-opening for me. Massive talent here in the US. Massive talent in the US. And again, the trick is keep them focused, listen to them. Of course, you have to listen to your employees, but always remember what you're here for is to get over there, wherever over there is. Yeah, the US is certainly a fantastic place to do business. That's for sure.
And one of the reasons why businesses look to move into different geographies is because and especially for those that are investor-backed, you're de-risking your business by spreading that business over multiple economies as well. And when economies do well, that can offset maybe some of the economies that aren't doing well. And the more economies that you trade in, though, the more challenges that you're bringing into your life. And Tony, sort of bring this full circle, your initial sort of keynote speak about resilience. How does leading over multiple territories test your resilience more as a leader?
You know, I think you have to be, you know, aware that every country's got its anomalies, but I go back to my default again. It has to be about the business. You've got to put your business first. Yes, you have to look after your employees. Yes, you've got to, you know, be aware of the territories they're in, the different countries they're in, and the different rules and regulations and compliance. I think compliance is a big thing, that's for sure. But ultimately, you've got to put your business first as a leader, and get your best out of the employees. Make tough decisions. Don't wait. Don't wait. If you've got to change, you've got to change. If you don't change quick enough, you'll get left behind, and you won't. If you start diluting your purpose, somebody said about the brief.
Yeah.
The brief. It's all about the brief. As simple as that is. Why rush into something? Make sure you brief. Everybody buys into it, and then you know, you're not going too far wrong. But expect curveballs, as they say in baseball here. You know, U-turns, but always put your business first, and make sure that that brief is met across the world in all of your organisations.
Can I add a point to that?
Of course.
I think probably the other bit I would add is communication.
Yeah.
We all know, if you have teenagers, it's difficult to communicate in general with people that live in your house and have to listen to you, never mind people that you work with in the same office. But the communication becomes, I think, even more critical because you have to rely on things like Teams chat and email, which people have their own perception, even what you just did that exercise. Your tone changed in the way you read The American. You know, and I know that because when I hire people in the U.S., I say, how's your resilience and do you have thick skin? Because you're going to wake up to an email that may seem like a very polite British email, but it will be scathingly direct. So, you know, that is a bad idea. Oh, good morning. It's 5:30. You know, so there's that nuance, and then there's little things that seem funny. We were talking about from soup to nuts. Nobody knows what that expression is in the UK. It comes up. It's something that everyone says, especially here. You know, from including everything. So from soup to nuts, you've got to think about. Am I playing in the space that's going to welcome the people on the other side? So the big ones for me is when I first worked for my first UK company, before TalentWorks, I went over to London. I had induction meetings with everyone. Wasn't sure what induction was. I guess it was onboarding. So had lovely meetings. And I'd meet someone, and then we'd have a follow-up, and I said, great, let's talk next week. And then I get an out of office saying they're on annual leave for the year. I'm like, why? They didn't say they were going on leave, but that's just vacation. Some people do an annual leave for half a day, which just doesn't make any sense to an American who hasn't been exposed to that. So it's little things like that. Even the diaries. You know, people in the U.S. don't use that phrase. You know, let's put in the diary. Or you know, being able to be clear on the dates, especially as you get into the middle months. You know, I lived in the UK. I never realized, because I was a student, that the dates were different. So somebody's saying, let's hurry up and meet, and it's, you know, 10/4, and I'm thinking, wow, you're going to wait till October? This is May. You know, this is February. I thought we were talking in the spring. So those little things, which seem like not a big deal, that's just being welcoming to your coworkers or your customers, and it goes along. And now you have tools that can just fix that pretty quickly too.
Yeah, I mean, having worked in that environment, all of those things are things that you bump into, and every day is a skill day. You're learning all these things all the time. As I said at the start, that this would be interactive, and it's time for the audience participation. It'd be great to, any questions for the panel?
I do have questions for Jody and Russ. So my prior company I worked for, we were global. We were in 11 countries, and I'm going to the values and communication piece. I had a CEO, US-centric, And he created these values, and our country manager in Australia lost it when we said we were going to hold you accountable. And with the MBO piece of it, and she quit.
Yep.
Just abruptly quit. So when you're talking about values are really important, and I truly believe, and I always have as an HR person, that values drive the behavior. But we struggled with how do you create values when you're global, because there is that meaning and definition that's just a little bit different.
Yep.
And I don't know the secret sauce to it, because it's really hard when you're dealing with somebody, as I was, a US person, who didn't really, it wasn't sensitive to, we had people in Egypt and Armenia, and and our values didn't resonate around the world.
Yep.
They did in the US. How would you handle that?
So that's the work we're doing quite a bit of that right now, because I do think that's happening. And what's happening is level setting the values, but then also testing the values. So the best way to do that, and this is how our approach is to do some regional focus groups, or by brand or by business unit, just to make sure that, is there anything that we need to know? And I've had clients this year who've said, these are our values, we have 6, we need to make it 3, which is a good recommendation. Or these are out of date values, we're open to new ones, or we've merged, and it's a lot of M&A activity is causing this. They had these values, we have these values, this is kind of the same, so it's wordsmithing. And then whatever it is, and I'm pretty sure you're going to follow suit, you're going to have that general framework and that message and that brand, but there needs to be that adaptation. Even for headlines, for like employer brand headlines, there could be a Chinese proverb that's used instead of the language that's used in the US. So I do think it is making sure the intent is the same, the language might change, and that tying performance to values is new everywhere. So it's that communication, education, before it just gets sent in an email. And they have to be launched and branded properly so people understand this is a change. And some people will leave, and that might be okay if the organization's moving in a direction to be value-based.
I'm glad you went first on that. That was really good. It sounds like your CEO didn't really consult his team on that, or his employees. So
He didn't. I was trying to explain, we need to do this. I wanted to do focus groups and so forth, and this is it, and this is what we're
Done in the boardroom.
And
Yep.
it just kind of shook out, and we did lose people, and I lost 2 country leaders, so it was a pretty.
I think the example of be accountable, it's 2 words. It's really, there's a lot of context that sits underneath that. So I think what companies are starting to do now is not just pump out their values, but contextualize them with, well, what behaviors do those values actually mean? And maybe if he'd done that and gone to his Australia team and said, hey, what accountability means for us is X, Y, and Z, they might have had more understanding and of what that meant for them.
Yeah.
Being accountable on the face of it doesn't seem like that bad a thing to do. But
No, culturally, I think it rubbed the Australian team, which was a large portion of our organization, the wrong way.
Yeah.
And
well, the implication is you're not accountable. You just run off and do your own thing, right? There's probably a reverse implication of that.
So I learned a lot about Australia. It's a tribal community,
Yeah.
and there's a whole way of,
Yeah.
it's very different, and we have an office in the UK. It's just very different, and so, I mean, even for me as the head of HR at that time, it was a learning lesson. Even though I worked at global companies, I think that was shocking to me to kind of. I just couldn't understand it.
Comes back to the communication. So that's, I think, what companies are doing, and they want to move fast, and they want to fix things, and they want to realign, and they want to have new KPIs, and they're moving so quickly in that boardroom discussion that they may be sharing that with the leadership team, but that waterfall from leadership team to managers to your directors and then your employees, that's a problem, because if you leave it up for them to interpret what this means, people do freak out. They quit because they're afraid they're going to get fired, which is not the intent. The intent is that we want to have more like-minded people join this organization who care about curing cancer or care about whatever that might be. And I do think the communication is having a problem. And part of that is that you've seen a huge influx of really good marketing people and good HR people being laid off. So you're missing that strategy piece, and that is now coming back to bite organizations that are moving too quickly.
Leaders need to have empathy for, if you've set up teams in Australia, they're going to feel really isolated.
Yeah.
I'm calling it Kirsten in New Zealand, right? You're on the other side of the world. If you're the only, we have one person out in Singapore for Asia. He's been there for quite a long time. feeling quite isolated, so we have to over-index on communication with him to make sure he's feeling engaged and part of the business while we develop that. So you can't just, it's not like square pegs and square holes. There's got to be some nuance around how you manage people.
And there's a lot of survey fatigue. So surveys get overused, but pulse surveys are good for things like that. Quick pulses, then sharing the pulse data and that sort of annual meeting or quarterly meeting with the business. I do find like people just, especially when you look at the generational shift of the people who are working now, their expectation, if they're a new grad or a Gen Z or millennial, even Gen X, they want to know why. And that's new. You didn't have to explain why. So I think the why is a big part of what's helping and hurting businesses that do the why right.
And I think even though this is really important to be really cognizant of the tone changes, the language changes as well, I think as humans, we're all a little bit more forgiving of that if the behaviours behind it actually sort of add up. And so for those types of extreme scenarios, you can usually take that back to say, well, I know it was meant to be an S, but they put a Z, but I actually believe them because of how they're acting and how they're behaving, and that's true leadership. Were to have a reaction like that, there clearly must have been an underlying problem in the distrust of that
Before
relationship
that,
as well.
But pushing values down doesn't work.
No.
I've been doing this 40 years, right?
Yeah.
And I've been on many workshops, weeks away, about value, whatever. Pushing values don't work. And have it on mugs and posters on walls. I've done all that branding.
Picture of
my
a tiger with success.
Absolutely. And I won't mention companies, but I mean...
Attitude.
It just doesn't work. They have to be behavioural-based values. You won't change your company, you won't improve your company unless you change your behaviour. And that's not easy. But having values on a wall, we have pivot feelers, whatever it might be, right? Seen it all, done it all. Don't work. They've got to be employee-based behavioural values. And don't have 10 of them, just have 3 of them.
But social media, I mean, I think, companies were a little bit afraid of social media, like they've been afraid of, AI, and it's changing. And so companies that are doing it right. So another scenario would be, here are the values, here's some social templates that any employee can put, and I can nominate Kirsten for being, brave. That's one of our values. And I can put on my LinkedIn that Kirsten is brave, that she moved into this new role, and she is showing us how the employees work and live. And so then those values become relevant, and it's not just posters on the wall. Yeah. And then you start to have that buy-in from employees, which I agree is key.
Yeah. Any more questions from the room? Yeah?
I've got one from the world.
Oh, okay.
How do changing data protection and privacy laws impact international operations?
Wow.
Sorry to bring
Okay,
the
that's sort of
conversation
that's sort of fallen through the gap on everybody's skill set, really. But
I can speak about that a little
Yeah.
bit. So a lot of companies in different countries have had to adapt. So like in the UK, that is, the most extensive. And so, Fragment is a global organization. So we've adapted to that and risen, our standards are what the highest standards are globally. And that changes how we operate. How do we collect information? What kind of verification do we get from clients? How do we protect our data? And whatever the highest standard out there is what global companies have to rise to meet.
UK is leading, GDPR, so back in the day, which wasn't that long ago, you would talent pool and you'd save all the resumes and you'd save all the employees, and if you found someone, you didn't have to get permission. So now even using HubSpot and those types of tools, it's pretty standard for most businesses, or you should be doing, to give people an exit out. You have to qualify if they are, if they're actually a customer, if they're a lead, if they're someone I met on the street. So I think that's changed quite a bit.
And to be fair, I think a lot of the CRM systems, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, they do have the built-in protections in to keep you on the right tracks for the most part.
Yeah.
The sign-ons, and we're just seeing things like everybody needs to, it takes more time, but secure and have sort of duplicate, 2 sign-ins and codes, and everyone complains about it because they're running from system to system, but that's the only way to really manage yourself and protecting the data.
Okay, yes?
As you're thinking about expansion into globally or coming here into the U.S., what are some of the top 3 errors that a company can avoid from your different perspective?
My first one is, don't just pick a cool city you want to have an office in and then have a sticker shock. I mean, New York is always the first on the list, which, as a Bostonian, we've talked about that, so we're not, but if you're not prepared for what that office space and those salaries and that expectation, then people make a quick jump and say, well, then we're not going to go into the U.S. But there's lots of other places that you go to Hampshire. You can go to lots of other places to get the talent. And so I do think that's one that the decisions are sometimes led by, oh, that seems like a cool place to be, or I know that I have, some contacts there. So that's one from my end.
I think for people that haven't spent much time in the US, don't assume it's one country, one homogeneous country. I guess you probably know that, but that's an obvious one. And for me, a mea culpa is product market fit, knowing, not just assuming that your product's going to lift and drop into another region. And that's a mistake we made with Hong Kong and Singapore. A lot of the work we did was very focused on bulk outsourcing of commentary. And that work just wasn't being done there. It was being done back in London or New York. So we made assumptions that we had to roll back pretty quickly.
One of the things that we see quite a lot is that with the rise now of engagement models to be able to quickly hire workers in lots of different locations, like EOR models, etc. And they're really great and a useful tool to use them. But sometimes businesses confuse the pace and flexibility of engaging a worker in a different country with the need to still integrate into that community, to still be present, to still be visible as well. And just because it's easier to actually interact, there's still there's a theme here that everything's different, but everything's actually the same. How you still need to put the effort into the community, into understanding how business operates, into understanding how the sort of networking works in that area. And sometimes, whether it's technology or social media, in this case, I'll use just payroll vehicles.
Yes.
People go, oh, it's really easy. I've just got the worker over there, 12-month contract. Nothing's happened. I'm going to pull back from my US strategy. Well, you didn't put the time, effort, energy, and emotion into investing into that particular place as well.
I budgeted for a Pennsylvania employee, and I ended up with a California employee, and those are very different payroll expectations and expectations of leave, et cetera. So it is like 50 countries. And
for me, actually, as a founder, the biggest thing, just thinking about that a bit more while the others were talking, was if I'm starting in the UK and going to build a US business, it's basically like starting a whole brand new business again. You're going back to startup mode. So think about the management time, the cost, the cash reserves, and not running out of money, because it really is like starting up again.
Yeah. I mean, I'd add on the true cost of business and the impact to your business. So where we've found in the past, we should have done more due diligence about the total cost of the business. It's far more than you think. Far more than you think. And then the impact of the business is simple things like commute. I mean, I used to drive south of Boston into Boston, 2.5 hours a day, one way, 5 hours. So there's the impact of the business, so even from the commute perspective, but it's really the true cost of the business in any city. Really do your homework there, because that'll make or break your business in that city.
yeah.
It also takes a lot longer than you think it's going to take.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think Tony and I were talking about this earlier, there are some brilliant businesses in other parts of the world that come to the U.S.
Yeah.
And I will say, the U.S. is pretty parochial in certain cities. There's not a massive global percentage. Like if you stopped 20 people on the street in Boston, maybe 4 would have had the experience of working for a global business, and many haven't. They could be, or they've worked for like a Fidelity their whole life and never talked to someone from another country. So I do think that depending on where you're trying to break into the trade, having that that salesperson potentially be an American who has the relationships or knows what legal resources or what marketing resources as you're starting to grow. Still having, founders here for the important messages and pitches and culture. But I haven't seen a huge amount of success when you push a whole bunch of folks to a different region with an assumption that we are just the best at this and we don't need to have any native either, connections. And I think sometimes that comes off as arrogance and that can backfire, and it's absolutely not what the intent is. So, find that token American and make some introductions, or vice versa, someone in the UK.
I also think, my world now, real estate is a huge investment. Getting the real estate strategy right is imperative. You work remote, work in the city, work, but getting the real estate strategy, I spent so much time getting that right. Get your real estate strategy right. It's really, it's you have to go hand in hand with the HR guys.
Yeah.
Because it's a HR real estate discussion, but that's a big part of your cost, real estate.
That's true. If you lean on one side and you say, oh, I worked for a firm and they decided to put the US headquarters in Cleveland, and all the Americans said anywhere but Cleveland, but it was basically free for them to go to Cleveland. I think they paid us. But then the challenges for the talent continued, so nobody was really listening to the American leadership at the time. So, balance both.
From an immigration perspective, it's making sure that you have a plan for global mobility. Do you plan on just hiring local U.S. workers, or if you plan on bringing people in from other countries, what does that look like? Can you? We've certainly seen businesses that are just starting their operations and they might want some of their senior leaders to come over, only to realize if you come over as a visitor, you can't actually work and do the things that you need to do as part of those operations. Or if you have somebody, maybe you have like a whole marketing team, they've led a campaign in Europe and now you want to bring them here. Can you actually do that? So as part of building the business and your plans, making sure that you just functionally, can you do it? Do you have the investment and the funds needed to accomplish that?
Can I ask her a question?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes.
What's the company's view on H-1Bs and what your clients should do?
What is beyond the H-1B?
Yeah.
Well, there's a whole alphabet soup of immigration. If you are a global company, I think the L1 is a really popular option, because if you work for an organization abroad for at least a year as a manager or specialized knowledge, you can bring them in. And we see a lot of companies do that. They might want to hire somebody that they can't bring in otherwise, and they'll say, okay, well, we'll employ you in our UK office for a year, and then that will allow us to transfer you in. There's visas for any kind of role imaginable out there. It's just a matter of aligning that to the talent in the role.
What I meant was, how are you advising your clients about how to deal with the H-1B stuff that's going on just now?
So there's so much uncertainty. I can get into the weeds, but if you're here on an H-1B, the program is in place. There are a lot of legal updates. It's unclear how much of it will go through. People are still hiring in H-1B status. I think a lot of companies wouldn't hire H-1B workers if they didn't need to. It's a really expensive investment. So if you need the talent, we're seeing that employers are still, giving offers and trying to extend the H-1Bs, and at the same time looking for alternatives. So kind of, hoping for the best for the H-1B category, but seeing what else they can do if, the regulations get tighter.
That's where the telemapping is coming in, is that they see that, we've managed this thus far with remote workers and H-1Bs and this and that, but sustainability, we need to start to look and see, are there other people here in the market that we maybe passed on before that we could either bring in and upskill, or bring in and start to sort of, complement with the risk. And so people are looking at the risk right now. Yeah.
We've got time for one more question. Yes, sir?
I've got a question. How durable do you think the current tariff regime is going to be, and how that should factor into whether you partner with companies overseas, or whether you get raw materials from overseas, or whether you establish operations overseas?
I'll take that one.
Well, I've just dealt with a major construction
Yeah.
project here in Boston,
Yeah.
and obviously the new tariffs is problematic, but manageable. I think you have to set expectations across the supply chain. You know, your client, where you deliver to, I guess. It's not an easy one to address, that's for sure. But I mean, I think if you've got to be transparent, do you pass it on now, or do you hold back? Do you wait for things to change? I think every company's got to make its own decision at that point. But I think being transparent, that they're there, and we're all in the same boat, I guess, and just communicate to the people who you're supplying services to and/or materials to.
Yeah.
Because we're all in the same boat at the moment. Will it last? I don't know. I don't know.
I'm seeing delays in budget. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I see.
Is
Yeah.
delays,
Same
and
budget.
proposals sitting
Yeah.
much longer, delays in budget because the forecasting is so difficult. Are we going to be able to win this bid, which would then
Yeah.
have us build this area, legally need to go through this, market ourselves, and hire the people?
Yeah.
So all of us get affected by it.
Yeah.
It's just how honest they're being about why that is. I do think that it's making it difficult for organizations. Usually I'm having the budget conversations in August, and I've had more bleed into September and even this week than from years past because they just were delayed. The boards were holding back. They wanted to understand what was going to affect. So I do think we're a little bit behind. So there is going to be a lot of activity to compete.
Yeah, we certainly saw that. So lots of non-US headquartered businesses, we don't need data to understand. They all want to trade and interact with the US. And I would say certainly for the first half of this year, that almost ground to a halt. And if you take the sort of general consensus of businesses we speak to, it actually saw a rise in businesses considering the UAE type strategy at the same time, which is one that, to the longevity point, I think we'll find a way and everything will be fine in the medium to long term. But I think in the short term, we certainly saw businesses who couldn't wait, who couldn't delay, change strategic direction for a period of time, which is something that we're all going to have to think about in that long-term impact of how these impact business.
And we haven't talked about at the employee level, right? So at the end of the day, it's, do you have engaged employees that are going to stay? It's great to have all of these goals and perceptions, but if your employees aren't buying it and they're disengaged or they're quietly quitting or they're quitting, that really throws you, especially when you weren't planning for the cost of acquisition of new folks. And so I do think that employees that have been part of these lean and mean teams for the last 2 years are tired, they're burnt out, they're getting sort of beat up on, well, we're not meeting sales goals, or the product isn't delivering, and so we're getting to a point where I think you are going to see some attrition again next year because people are just, although the job market's not great, they don't feel it's sustainable to keep doing what they're doing without the supported roles that have been on hold. So I would say, just as a tip, check in with your employees and your managers, and if it's not more money or if it's not more responsibility, is there something else that you can engage them with? Back to values, back to things that don't cost money but give people a reason to stay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, very much for your time. Thank you for everybody making the effort to be here today. Thank you, everybody, for registering online. Our amazing panel and the contributions today. And finally, to Kirsten, the sort of secret coordinator behind this, Rich and the technical team, and then Fraggerman and their amazing facilities team who turned this overnight into what it is today. So feel free to stay in network. Anybody remotely, if there's anybody on the panel that you want to be introduced to today, please just reply to the marketing invitation and we'll facilitate that introduction as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.
Oh, well done.
Fun.